This is Fresh Tracks Weekly. This week, we're going to talk a bit about whether or not you're being a jerk on public lands and maybe not even realizing it. Before that, though, we have a few news stories from the week. Quick update in Colorado. Last week, we talked about Colorado's proposal to do away with non-resident over-the-counter archery elk tags. Well, it happened. The commission voted 9-1 to eliminate the OTC archery elk option for non-residents. The number of non-resident archery elk hunters has surpassed the number of resident hunters in recent years and has put a fire under many Colorado residents to do something about it. It is not yet clear exactly how many tags will be allocated to non-residents now, just that it will no longer be the previously unlimited amount. So far, the feedback that I've been reading has been mostly positive, even from non-residents, many of whom thought that the crowding was also an issue. In Montana, American Prairie just acquired 12,500 more acres of land, bringing their totals up to 475,000 acres between deeded and leased property. Depending on who you ask, this could be viewed as super cool, or it could be viewed as the end of a way of life for Montana ranchers. American Prairie has been purchasing land throughout north central Montana in an attempt to save the prairie, creating one of the largest nature reserves in the United States. They say it will serve as a refuge for people and wildlife forever. The land they purchase is all from willing sellers, and they aim to conserve open space and wildlife habitat. They look for land to purchase that connects to both public land along with their own land, and once they have it, they implement management strategies to, quote, rewild the landscape. They have a pretty significant bison herd, along with utilizing cattle grazing on some parcels to try to recreate historic large-scale grazing patterns. The majority of the land is open to the public as well. A lot of it is in Montana's block management program, which allows hunters access to hunt. As a hunter, my own personal view of the efforts of American Prairie are pretty positive. They improve wildlife habitat, they allow access for hunting on land that previously had little to no access. That opinion, however, is not shared by many central Montana locals. Driving around, you will see numerous signs that say, quote, save the cowboys, stop the American Prairie Reserve. The concerns from these people is the idea that AP is buying up these properties and taking them out of the hands of working ranches, subsequently creating less jobs and changing the culture and way of life within these areas. The United Property Owners of Montana has put a lot of effort into stopping the American Prairie's efforts with the Save the Cowboy signs and sharing information about what AP is doing. I will say that some of UPOM's messaging has been flat out lies, primarily as it concerns to hunting and recreation. They claim that AP is limiting hunting and recreation, but I have only observed the exact opposite. Ranches that used to be closed down to the public completely are now open for recreation as well as hunting after being purchased by AP. I think most of the pushback is that AP's goal is different than their own goal and people don't like different. And I can sympathize with that viewpoint, but personally, I'd way rather see the land go to AP than out-of-state billionaires. Speaking of out-of-state billionaires, in Wyoming, Joe Ricketts, the founder of TD Ameritrade, has been attempting to build a luxury resort in the heart of prime elk and moose wintering ground, along with the area being on the Sublette mule deer migration corridor. Construction in this area has been limited seasonally at the request of Wyoming Game and Fish to protect wintering wildlife, which in turn has kept construction on the resort from being built between November 15th and April 30th. The billionaire and his agent have continually made requests and changes to the original plans, attempting to bargain by offering to create more wildlife-friendly migration corridors in exchange for more lenient construction timeframes. The locals have been pushing back, though, in county commissioners' meetings, trying to uphold the seasonal restrictions, claiming that they don't appreciate the tactics used by this billionaire. A few of the commissioners did feel as though the trade for wildlife mitigation for flexible building dates was a worthwhile trade, but the public did not share those thoughts, which is likely the reason the request failed, meaning that they will still have to abide by those seasonal construction dates. Obviously, it's private land, so the locals can't stop the construction completely, but they certainly can make it very difficult and ensure that they follow the guidelines to protect wintering wildlife. A new update to wildfirerisk.org has shown that significantly more people and homes are at risk of wildfire than previously thought. The data shows that around 1/3 of the US population lives in counties with high wildfire risk, which includes more than 48 million buildings. This is interesting because it is directly connected to public land management, particularly within the Forest Service and how they manage land across the West. Years of fire suppression have caused fuel loads to build significantly to the point that now when fires do occur, they often are much bigger and burn hotter than they did historically. There's no perfect answer as how to manage these forests to prevent fires, but there are certainly tools that they have been starting to implement. One of which is to let it burn, basically the idea when no threat to life or property exists, simply letting those fires burn while observing them in order to let the fuels reduce, and doing so often promotes healthy regrowth, depending on the location. The problem with letting them burn is it's becoming increasingly difficult to not have threats to life or property. A ton of recreation exists across these lands, people constantly scattered across the landscape, and so many areas have now been developed with buildings that letting it burn rarely occurs except in remote wilderness areas or national parks. The other mitigation tool is active management, which often includes thinning of trees or doing prescribed burns when managers can better control the conditions, but also implementing any management is difficult to accomplish due to litigation from environmental groups. It will be interesting to see if this new data will help with convincing agencies and local governments and the general public to take more action to prevent big wildfire events. In New Mexico, the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, the Bureau of Land Management, and several other partners supplied funding for new water sources for wildlife within the Sierra Padrones, Polvadera, and Chupadera mountains. The water catchment system they installed is significantly larger than traditional systems, which was designed to keep up with the expected wildlife use. It'll be able to produce up to 5,000 gallons of water with an average annual precipitation of 8 to 10 inches. I always like to try to clarify why some of these water developments are now necessary. Because of human disturbance on the landscape through fire suppression, cattle grazing, along with overall decreased precipitation, has created areas across the Southwest that lead to less productive wildlife habitat. By installing these artificial water sources, managers are able to combat some of that decline. These drinkers will go a long ways to benefiting both the abundant numbers of elk in the area, along with helping out the bighorn sheep. The sheep have been struggling since their reintroduction in 1998, but lately, through both vegetative treatments and the installation of water developments like these, they have seen drastic increases, which is pretty cool to hear. All right, now we're going to jump into our deeper dive where we're talking about common courtesy on public land, along with some public land etiquette that might be a little less common. We're talking about public land etiquette.
Yeah.
Which I like to think that a lot of our audience probably has a lot of the common sense stuff under control. I think that maybe we'd be preaching to the choir to some extent,
right,
about some of the leave no trace aspects of when you go out on public land and you're camping.
Yeah.
But there's also some less obvious things that I myself question sometimes, where it's like stuff that might be legal, like completely legal, but it's not necessarily the right thing to do.
Right.
And then I think there's a blurred line there sometimes too, of what is acceptable or what might be good or bad out there. So
yeah, and part of what really resonates with me is I was at a panel from the Wildlife Society, which is the agency, mostly agency scientists, biologists, and they had a person from the Forest Service and a person from the BLM, and they said their number one challenge right now is the amount of user days of general outdoor recreation. It is more than doubled in the last 5 years. And there's an education program they're working on because some people just don't know.
Right.
There's compliance programs because some people know. And look at how many people we see in Yellowstone go off the marked areas, even though there's a big sign, do not leave this trail. They got to go out there and get the selfie or whatever, and they walk out in the hot pots or whatever.
For sure.
So there's the compliance side. And then there's just the how much use can these public lands withstand? And it was interesting because they said, well, in the hunting world, we don't see it as much because you guys are kind of restricted by who gets a tag, right? It's not like everybody can go or
right. Well, and then, in some places it might be higher concentrations, like we just talked about with general seasons in Colorado or over-the-counter opportunities. Right. So there are places where hunters might be higher concentrations as well.
Right. But they were talking about in the context of just general outdoor recreation.
Yeah.
And I think it's reaching that point where, and they asked the question, what are we going to be able to do about it?
Yeah.
Well, when we get into some of these things, hopefully people understand the impacts and won't be one of those folks.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's but again, to go back to our audience too, it's I like to hope and think that our audience knows better, to some extent.
They do.
And I'd love to think that hunters in general too like to abide by a lot of the principles and public land etiquette, but I've seen plenty of examples of hunting camps that do not clean up after themselves and do not follow what I would call good public land etiquette. So, but anyway, so I guess, for some of the common things that I was thinking of, the big one is to not poop on the ground and just leave your toilet paper everywhere.
Right. Surface shitting is if you could catch the person, you'd want to rub their nose in it.
Right. And so I like to think that one's an obvious one, but maybe not. And then I guess another part of it too is also like, well, what is the right amount, or where do you bury it and how deep do you bury it? And that's another thing. And so and it's funny because there's no actual regulation on some land there is.
Right.
Like on some heavily trafficked areas, heavily trafficked trails and rivers particularly, there are rules, and some of them are starting to go to pack it out.
Yeah, like the Grand Canyon trips in Arizona.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Those float trips, you're packing it out.
Right, yeah. You got to bring your
Montana. I've never applied on the Smith River in Montana.
Yep, Smith River went to it this year because they used to have latrines that they would dig out every year, the standard latrines, and you were required to use those at designated spots. But now it's all pack it out, so you got to bring your wag bags and a bucket or whatever and pack out your crap. Yeah. But for most of the land use, like where hunters might be, often dispersed camping sites and whatever, for the Forest Service, they don't have it's not an actual law or regulation, I don't think, but they do have recommendations.
Yep.
And those recommendations are to dig it down 6 to 8 inches,
and
do it 200 feet from any water.
Yep.
And also ideally 200 feet from any main place of travel, roads and trails. So that's kind of the common etiquette is 6 to 8 inches deep away from rivers and streams and trails. Yeah. So that's pretty easy to do. It's not a ton to ask.
Right. And if I see somebody's camp and they don't have a shovel, I'm like, I bet these guys are just shitting out there in the woods and throwing it. But maybe that's my bias. It's frustrating to see that because that's like the basic principle, right? Mm-hmm. But then how many times do we wheel up to a campsite or someone else? Even it can be a developed or undeveloped, and there's beer bottles, there's aluminum cans, that stuff doesn't burn.
Right. Yeah. Just
get it haul it home.
Just straight litter. That's another obvious one to me. It's just don't leave your trash out there. That's come on. That's anyway. Yeah. So that one to me, one of those obvious ones that you would hope that most people would just recognize and follow.
Yeah, you would hope so.
Another obvious one to me would be closing gates.
Yeah.
So when you come across a gate out on some public land, grazing allotment. If it's closed and there's cows in the air, or even if you don't see the cows and the gate's closed, there's probably a reason for it.
Right.
It might not be, but there could be cows in that pasture somewhere. Yeah. You should probably close the gate. Yes. It's just a common courtesy, common practice of leave the gate how you found it. Yeah. Just leave the gate how you found it.
I mean, you're hitting on. I'm here on the 7 principles of leave no trace, and you're hitting on just about all of them, Marcus.
Yeah. So, you want to run through the 7 principles?
Yeah, I can just say them real quick, but it's plan ahead and prepare, travel and camp on durable surfaces, dispose of waste properly, leave what you find. In other words, don't go out there and, be a collector of every artifact because in a lot of places it's illegal.
Yeah, you actually want to look up the regulations in some places because, some places, if you find an arrowhead, you can't legally keep it. And then some other places it's might be legal, but it's pretty frowned upon.
Yeah. Minimize your campfire impacts. And that comes in many respects. One, don't go build a new fire pit every place you go.
Right.
Try to use existing ones that are already there. Also about keeping your fires, make sure your fires are put out. Respect wildlife. Every year in the Yellowstone, it's almost 3 times a week, we get to hear about some tourists getting beat up or mauled or run over because they don't respect that these are wild things. And the last is be considerate of others. That's pretty simple stuff.
Right. And some of it's pretty just overview, not exactly, it's not super definitive one way or another, I guess. Right. But just general principles that are great to follow. Another one that I think in the obvious category that I put down would be just not tearing up the landscape, driving off road and just tearing up the landscape. A lot of times that's illegal as well. But then there's some parts where it's just if you're going to you can legally pull off the road a certain amount to camp or whatever. But if you're in doing so, you're going to absolutely destroy that area by tearing it up with mud. It's come on, just think about it, be smart about it. So to me, some of the, do you have any other common things that you think of?
No, I mean, it's all kind of our own anecdotal observations. I've been on a lot of trails that are closed to mountain biking. But I don't know what it is about mountain bikers. It's almost like if it says foot traffic only, a mountain biker, in every population, right? Every group of people, there's those SOBs who got to give a bad name to the rest of them. I get it. And those are probably the ones I run into.
Right.
But man, it chaps my hide when I'm on a trail that's closed to anything other than hiking. And all of a sudden you can hear it coming. And they're coming down the trail and they just about run you over. And if you don't get out of the way, I think they would run you over. Anyhow.
Yeah.
If you're a mountain biker, respect that one principle I said, respect other users.
Well, it is interesting with mountain biking as an example because around Bozeman, there's a lot of unofficial trails that essentially have become de facto mountain bike trails,
right.
which I think can be a good thing. Like it's just like these are the trails that are basically designated to mountain bikers,
right.
and you're almost frowned upon if you're hiking on those
right.
trails.
Oh yeah.
And so then there's other trails that's like these are kind of our designated hiking trails. Like please, just don't mountain bike on it. They haven't actually put regulations in place on a lot of those. Some of them they have. Yeah. But that's like kind of an interesting aspect to it too, because if you're coming from outside and it's not your local spot, you have no idea like what the common use of that trail is. So that one's tough if you don't live there.
Yeah, and I mean we're talking about public lands, but I also think about public waters because last week I was on a public water and the amount of floating water bottles,
beer
styrofoam,
cans,
stuff that was washing up on the beach. And now I look at just out west of town here, we got a very it's turned in the summertime. The lower Madison has turned into like Floatville, America.
Yeah, the bikini hatch is what they call it.
Yeah. And the amount of litter there now compared to what it used to be just in the last 10 or 15 years as that's become popular. I don't know if people think if you sink your beer can or your beer bottle that somehow it dissolves then. No, it's insane.
Yeah, it's really disappointing. And I think a lot of that is, sure, some of it's probably accidental, but a lot of it's is complete ignorance. And then people just don't know like exactly what they're doing. But it's just like, you're just trashing the landscape and it's sad to see. Yeah. And unfortunately, I don't think those are the people that are listening to this podcast.
That's the unfortunate part.
But anyway, so I think it'll be kind of fun to talk about some of the less obvious things, kind of where things that are legal, like it's not against the rules or regulations, but it's just like, where do you, and some of it is, but then it's also still common practice. So the first example, I guess, is burning trash. So a common occurrence is like you're in the backcountry, right? And you have trash, you produce trash, whatever it might be. You have your wrappers from your candy bars, your whatever. And a lot of people burn it. And it's very convenient to burn it. It appears to just go away. You just like throw it in the fire and it goes away, and you don't have to pack it out. And so that one's a tough one for me because personally, this is where my personal etiquette aligns. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I try to like keep it to like paper products.
Paper only for me.
Yeah, and so things like Mountain House packets,
foil packets,
things that have foil. That stuff, if you get the fire super hot, it does look like it goes away and to your vision, like you don't see it anymore. But what happens is that foil just starts to like melt down and it collects at the bottom of that fire pit. And so over years, like if you go to some of these big campgrounds and fire pits, because people throw beer cans, foil, whatever in there, there's just this massive brick of foil down there. That's not great. Like that's littering. Like you're littering, and that is illegal. So that one is where I kind of draw the line. But then there's also that blurred line too with like, so plastic things. There's a lot of like plastic based ones. It's like, well, it's not ideal. Right. Like you throw a plastic wrapper in there and that does go into the atmosphere. And it's like people are like, well, there's toxic chemicals going to the atmosphere. It's like, yeah, it is, but I don't know. There's also incinerators in cities that like burn, like compared to your candy bar wrapper, like it's a small drop in the bucket compared to what some of these, cities and landfills do. So it's just like that one. I don't know. I still have like mixed feelings. I won't lie. I've definitely burned plenty of plastic stuff in the backcountry, and it's just like, is that right or wrong? I don't know. It's not. Yeah. It's probably not great. Yeah. But
no, I kind of have your rule that if it's paper, I burn it. Yeah. If not, we bring those big contractor trash bags. And, part of it, we have the benefit of we use llamas a lot, right?
Yeah. You pack your trash out.
No, it's not even a question then. If you're just backpacking, well, guess what? You can roll your little foil things up. They're empty now. They're not going to take up a lot of space. Just haul it out of there.
Here's another one that I've done in the past that I also have mixed feelings about is taking foil. Like a very common one is if I'm at a mountain lake and I catch fish. And so like I cook it in some foil, right?
Yep.
And then there's a bunch of like skin and crust built up on that foil. And that I do throw onto the fire, but then I extract it before it's like starts melting. So I try to burn off the residue. And I've done that with like Mountain House and stuff too, where it's like it's melting that plastic and it's like getting down. But then I pull it out, so I'm still packing down that foil, but it doesn't have a bunch of scent and it doesn't goo. And so like, is that right or wrong? I don't know. It's another one of those blurred lines. It's like, so I still have, like every time I do it, I'm like, is this, should I be doing this? I don't know.
Yeah.
So,
and where we live, in grizzly country, I think that respect wildlife thing. Also, well, I would add to that for the public land users, the bear aware stuff. Don't provide attractants for bears.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to see a dead grizzly bear or a dead black bear, just provide some food attractant near a campground or in a developed camp space, because they're going to be there and they're going to get shot. Most often by an agency person.
Yeah.
And the reason they are there is because people didn't follow the food storage rules.
Yeah.
And I know that doesn't apply in a lot of other places, but it surely applies here.
Yeah, and in a lot of the pretty much any Forest Service land that has grizzly bears within the vicinity, now they've gone to food storage orders, which is you have to follow that. That is a law.
Yeah.
Like you have to properly store your food, whether that's in a locked vehicle, hard-sided container that's bear-proof, like certified bear-proof, or hanging 10 feet up and 4 feet away from the base of any tree. So that is another thing that I guess some people might not know about. There is pretty good signage now, though, at the most roadways and trailheads that is say like, "Hey, you got to do this. Like, you got to store your food."
Yeah.
So another one where there's some blurred lines for me is just fires in general. So the common practice, common etiquette to me, I guess, is like, so if there is an existing fire pit, like, use it. Like like anything on the road, like, or not, I shouldn't say anything, but a lot of stuff on the road, there's like actual campgrounds with steel firings. Like, okay, obviously that's the place you build your fire. But then dispersed camping spots, like I would say most of the popular ones have an existing firing already.
Usually
so it's like
a pile of rocks, a ring of rocks have been years have been built.
And it's like, okay, yeah. And then, so again, that's kind of obvious. Use the existing one.
Right.
But then the question becomes, so you're on a November elk hunt. It's freezing cold. You're up on top of a ridge. There's a bunch of snow on the ground. And you're just glassing all night and you're freezing. So you start a fire. So it's like, in that case, sometimes you might make a new fire ring. And I guess like this again is where I personally try to do it. It's like if I make a new fire ring, or a lot of times if there's just a bunch of snow, I just kick the duff away and just make a temporary fire ring, make a fire, and then just put it out when we leave.
Right.
But it's just like, how much rehabilitation should you do in those spots of like, I just basically put it out and then try to like kick some like duff and branches back over it, make sure that they're not going to light on fire and call it good. Like, I don't know, is that okay? And in some places it is illegal to establish new fire rings.
Right.
But in a lot of forest and BLM land, it's not illegal, but it's just like, it's kind of like frowned upon on starting new fire rings. Yeah. But that's just kind of the game we play as hunters, and I think not a lot of other public land users probably do, is establishing new fires.
And we did that video for the BLM last year, the year before, about how keep your fire as small as possible. Always make sure that you have something there to put it out. Don't do it in windy conditions. Right? A lot of people are like, well, duh, this makes sense.
Right.
But then also, don't leave a fire until it's cold to the touch. In other words, if you can put your hand on it, all right, then it's cold enough.
Right.
And, disperse those embers, disperse any wood, whatever, snuff it out in the snow. And then I pack a bunch of snow over where the fire pit was, even when it is cold at the touch. And then like you, I might throw some duff or something so that next year when the snow melts, it doesn't look like a scar on the landscape. But if you make it as small as possible,
right,
it's a minimal impact.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So that one's an interesting one too. So another one would be cutting live trees.
Yeah.
So this one is like, again, some public lands, it's illegal to do, to where you can't cut live trees down, obviously. Like that one's illegal in most places.
Right.
But then, like, where do you draw the line between, like, trimming a little brush here or trimming a tree branch? And it's just like, I don't know. Like, to me, it's like, I think even in, it becomes more of a thing like hunting out of tree stands, like trimming limbs to get a better shot angle in tree stands. And in some public land, that's illegal.
Yeah.
And then so others, it's not. And then is it like, if it's not, like, do you just send it? You just go for it? Cut a bunch of limbs? I don't know. Like, I wouldn't say that I run into this very often, but I know it's one that a lot of people do, especially with tree stand hunting. So
yeah, no, and you go to some camp areas, and it's like someone thought they were Paul Bunyan that day, and they got a new saw, and they just had to cut down, this beautiful young 6-inch caliper spruce tree.
Oh, yeah,
really? And it's just laying there, and it's green, so you're not going to burn it. It's like, come on, people.
So this actually is I think this would be an interesting moment to interject about Forest Service and BLM, both like regulations.
Yeah.
If you go to their websites, and both on the main Forest Service website, and then also if you go down into like each individual forest, it is difficult to find what the actual regulations are.
Yep.
It is not obvious.
No.
Like, it's all based, it's like, they have it nicely partitioned into activities. And so, like, if you go down into like certain activities, you can like click on like hiking or camping or whatever, but it's mostly like, and I like the fact that it's like, it's telling you places to go and things to do, but a lot of it is not telling you what is illegal or not recommended.
Right.
And it's just like, if you go all the way down into camping, it will say like, oh, if you disposing of your waste, please dig it down 6 to 8 inches and whatever. So, but it doesn't, there's no like regulation book.
Yeah.
Like there's no, or if there is, it's not easy to find.
Yep.
Like,
I don't know that I've ever found that legal, illegal.
Right. And so like that's where I think on, say like on the Custer Gallon Forest, I don't know actually about cutting live branches. Like I know you can't cut live trees.
Right.
If you go into like, there's a section for firewood cutting, and it's, it has like the things to say, like you have to cut dead or down trees, you have to have your firewood permit and so forth. And any wood that you're using for campfires has to be, dead or down.
Right.
But it doesn't explicitly, like in any other section of it, like you wouldn't find that. So if I'm going hiking or camping or boating, I wouldn't look in the firewood section.
Yeah.
Like, how would I know? Like, if you're someone who's completely ignorant to it and has never been out there, how would you know?
Right. And so, I think the point of that is maybe becoming very obvious from this discussion is that the education challenges ahead for the public land agencies are huge.
Yeah.
Because you have so many new users who are coming out and wanting to, do their summer vacation and glamping or whatever the heck they call it these days. And this is their first time and they just don't know.
Right.
I think just like here in Bozeman, if you don't have 4 dogs in Bozeman, you're really not cool anymore, And if you put them on a leash, you're really not cool. So this time of year, I live near one of the popular hiking trailheads. And we know that this time of year there are elk calves and there are fawns out there.
Yeah.
And there are people's dogs running and chasing these things to no end.
For sure.
And I don't know if I think these are good people. They care about animals because they have a pet, they have a dog. I think they're just that ignorant of what their dogs are doing out there.
For sure. That's a big one.
The other day, not yesterday morning, the morning before, there's a small mule deer buck laying in my yard. I think the reason is because it's the only place there isn't a dog chasing him.
Jeez. That's a big one, and I think people don't realize, because dogs, your Labrador will kill a fawn.
Yeah.
It's happened. I've seen it happen.
Yeah.
Like, people's dogs kill deer.
Right.
Like, it's not, and not even, like, the added stress is a big one, but then they will actually just literally kill them.
Right. And if you separate that doe and that fawn, you've probably sent the death warrant to that fawn anyhow. I mean, if your dog does.
Yeah. And
a lot of times that fawn is abandoned while mom comes in and distracts and hopes the dog will chase her.
Yeah.
And so that's, maybe it's just a Bozeman thing, but it is insane how many people, and then they let their dog shit on the trail. And they're like, oh, I forgot a bag. Well, every trailhead in Bozeman now has dog poop bags at the bottom. Don't give me that. This is the first time I've been dogless in my life. And I've never let my dogs run around and shit all over or chase deer or do whatever. And I get it because I grew up knowing you don't do that. But for the new user, we're going to have to address that at some point in time. That's impacting wildlife in a negative way.
So here's an interesting one. I'm curious to get your take on this. So making your own trails on Forest Service land. It is for sure illegal.
Right.
But it happens a lot. And I don't want to throw outfitters under the bus, but it's a lot of times outfitters.
Yeah.
And so I feel like, and it's so dependent on location, the drainage, and what forest it's on. But I think often people look the other way because those same outfitters that are pioneering new trails are also maintaining the Forest Service sanctioned trails.
They are.
Because the Forest Service doesn't have time or budget to get to them.
Right.
And so that one is an interesting one to me because in certain places it's rampant. There are some trails that do not exist on maps.
No.
And so I don't know. I'm curious what a lot of Forest Service personnel think about that. It feels like they just look the other way often.
Yeah. Well, I think they're just the Forest Service people just are so scarce on resources and time and money. I mean, you look at in this area we have one trails person, and we have how many thousands of miles of trails?
Well, it's very often getting contracted out now to other crews.
It
private
just has
contractors.
To. And so if some guy goes and cuts a little bit of a side trail, where does that rank on the priority list of? Oh, our main trail and highlight just washed out from a flood.
Exactly.
So
here's a moral dilemma question for you. So if you find a big outfitter cut trail, do you refuse to use it?
Probably not.
Yeah, I don't. I've used a bunch of them.
Yeah, it's not like I look at every established trail and say, "Oh, that's not on my map. I better not go there." It's like. Well, it looks like 47 horses and 3 cows have walked up this trail. I'm going.
Right.
So, yeah. I mean, and I guess it just comes back to, one, education helps people understand the impacts. 2, it hopefully modifies their behavior to have the lightest impact possible.
Right.
And that's what I hope for, anyhow.
Another one that I've run into very frequently is driving muddy roads. And it's there's a threshold there, and everyone's going to be different probably because it's just there's times where it's just well, I can get in there. I can drive that road. Should I?
Right.
Probably not. It's not technically illegal.
Right.
It's an open road. It's open right now. But if I drive it, there's going to be some huge ruts going through there.
Yep.
And I won't lie. I've done it, and I've looked back at stuff that I've done. I'm like, whew. Yeah. I probably should not have done that. Yeah. But that's one that I've encountered semi-frequently, and everyone's going to have a different threshold on that. But
no, you get a lot of this bentonite country and, gumbo, whatever you want to call it, in the Rockies. When it gets a little moisture on it, it's I should just walk or I should just wait for it to dry out because it's going to tear the crap out of some stuff.
Yeah. So that's another one of those gray area ones where it's hard. You have to, everyone's going to have a different threshold of what's acceptable to them. Yeah. And then, but yeah, there's things to think about. I think it's kind of interesting to.
Yeah. And I think the thing I think about is, we want people to go out and experience public lands because we want them to advocate for them. But at what point in time, the less informed the user, and that's just, the term ignorance, they're ignorant of the rules doesn't mean they're an ignorant person. It just means in this context they haven't had experience to it.
Right.
So the less informed the group of people are, the greater their impact. In other words, 1,000 people who are highly informed with all the leave no trace principles are probably going to have less impact than 1,000 people who just don't know. Right.
Yeah,
that's a reality.
All the people floating the lower Madison who just I don't know, just out here. There's probably someone that comes and picks up these beer cans after I throw them in the river.
Yeah.
And which unfortunately there is. They have cleanup days every year because people are so bad and littering. So it almost.
So anyway. What is going to be the the option remaining for general outdoor recreation that isn't kind of limited by permits like hunters are. We've already got permits on a place like the Smith River in Montana. You put in for a draw. The Grand Canyon, you put in for a draw.
Yeah.
Is that how we're going to get in some of these super popular public land locations where the impacts as one, the number of people, but also the lower threshold of education and knowledge results in more and more impacts?
Unfortunately, yes. Like, that's what's going to happen is there's going to be more permitting. Like, and I hate it.
Right.
Like, I hate the fact that you would have to get a permit to do something. In fact, I'm usually like, it pushes me away from doing things that require permits. And
Right.
like, I don't want to deal with it.
Yep.
But at the same time, it's like, I can see from the agency's perspective, like, that's the perfect in to educate the people on what is proper etiquette. Because when you get a Smith River permit, you have a little orientation.
Yeah.
And they talk you through what is allowed and what isn't allowed.
Yep.
And everyone has that standard talk that everyone gets. And so now you know. There's no more
excuse.
There's no excuse
For ignorance.
And so unfortunately and fortunately, depending on how you look at it, like, that's gonna be the way that things go. Or like, I'd like to think that at least it could be something where it's just like, it's just a required court. Like, hey, you just need a general permit. Maybe it's free, but in order to go out onto the Forest Service land, period, whether you're hiking, dog walking,
Right.
camping, doesn't matter. You have to take this online class
Yeah.
or something. I still hate it, but I feel
Right.
like that's at least a better middle ground where some of the stuff might go. But yeah, it's our future. Like, it's just like, as areas in the western U.S. that have a lot of public lands get more populated, it's just going to become more and more of an issue.
Yeah, it is. And I wish it wasn't the case, but I think it's responsible or incumbent on us with having platforms that we try to educate people to the best that we can, even though, like you said, our audience already knows most of this stuff. And the audience that watches Fresh Tracks Weekly is like the most
Right.
engaged and informed of our audience. So
Yeah, I think we're preaching to the choir.
right.
But yeah.
But hopefully this is an asset they can share with others
Yeah.
who, if they see places or communities that aren't thinking about it.
Yeah.
So
Well, thanks for all that intel. That's
thank you.
Yeah.
It's an interesting discussion.
Oh yeah, and it's endless. Like, there's so many rabbit holes you can go down, but
Yeah.
we should probably cut it off.
Yeah.
We're getting a little long. So.
All right. Thanks, Marcus.
Yeah, thank you.